Now, let us dwell upon an interesting topic regarding the GST rate on the job work services. Now, under the GST law, the entries under the rate notification seems quite straight, simple. However, it is not. And this is clearly evident from the recent poll conducted on our LinkedIn page regarding the applicable GST rate on the job work services which exhibit the nature of manufacturing. And interestingly, uh, it is it has come out that 60% says that 12% GST shall apply, 34% voted that 18%, and remaining 6% were not sure. Now, let me take you through those two entries, which are the major area of concern. So, starting with entry 26, subclause ID, which entails a GST rate of 12% on the job work services other than the specified entries. Next is clause 4 of entry 26, which entails the GST rate of 18% on manufacturing services on the physical inputs owned by others other than job work. Now, the tussle among the taxpayers were whether to go for the concessional of 12% or the 18%. Now, before we resolve this tussle, let us first understand the definition of job work. So, Section 2, subsection 68 of the CGST Act, it defines job work to mean any treatment or process undertaken by a person on goods belonging to another registered person. At the same time, Section 2, subsection 72 of the CGST Act, it defines manufacture to mean processing of any raw material or inputs that results in the emergence of a commodity having a distinct name, character, and use. Now, to add to this, the explanatory notes to the manufacturing services states that it includes not only the complete manufacturing process, which is outsourced, but also a portion of the process, which is being outsourced. So the confusion among the taxpayers were regarding the scope and the coverage of these two entries. So thankfully, CBIC has clarified that the concessional rate of 12% shall apply where the process or treatment is undertaken for a registered person, whereas if the process or the treatment is undertaken for an unregistered person, then 18% shall apply. And in our view, the circular has correctly interpreted these entries. Now, as you see that the advanced ruling pronounced by the authorities have not been very taxpayer friendly. But in this case, we have come across the favorable advance ruling in the case of Garware, in the case of Petronet LNG and Sheen Electroplates, wherein it has been held that GST of 12% shall apply on the job work services, irrespective of the fact that whether such activity amounted to manufacture or not. Interestingly, we also have a recent favorable advance ruling on this issue only in the case of Alcos, wherein the appellant was engaged in providing job work services by carrying out processes such as anodizing, plating on materials sent by the registered person. Now, the question before the advance ruling was that whether he shall be liable to pay GST at 12% or 18%. The advance ruling observed that the appellant is providing services only to a registered person. So it would fall under clause ID, and 12% shall apply. In our view, the above ruling is absolutely correct, taking the benefit of the circular. So now I
So one outcome out of all this discussion on job work thing, see, there has been a recent spurt of advanced rulings on this point, followed by the circular and last two amendments which happened in job work in last an year. We sincerely believe that wherever taxpayers are charging 12% GST on job work, there is an immediate requirement to relook at this position. Now, we are not at all saying that position may be correct or incorrect, but there has been too much changes, and there is a requirement to take a conscious call on the 12% rate, because it should not happen that with this frequent change we missed on something, and eventually the consequence is that based on the recent president circular, the rate was concluded to be 18%, whereas we were charging 12%. And in most of the cases, it is going to be a B2B activity. So there is a need to relook at this position to be doubly ensure on this point. So with this, I'll take over this session. We would be covering the interesting part, which is the multiple rulings which has come up in the recent past in the last month. We'll deal with this Supreme Court ruling in case of Toyota Kirloskar, dealing with the issue of credit on outdoor catering services. So in this case, the applicant was maintaining canteen, which was mandatory required under the provisions of Factories Act. He was providing outdoor catering services to its employee. In few cases, there were full recovery, and in few cases, there were the partial recovery. The issue in hand was whether the credit on outdoor catering was permitted or not. Department took a view that outdoor catering services are used primarily for personal consumption of employee. The definition of input services got amended in April 2011. So after the amendment, the credit is not admissible. This matter traveled to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court agreed with the view taken by the department that this canteen services is for the personal consumptions of employee, and Supreme Court also disallowed this credit. This is kind of a setback to the industry. In our considerate view, with due respect, this judgment seems to be incorrect by the Supreme Court. They didn't consider one basic fact that the employer was required to maintain this canteen mandatory. So it was, even though the ultimate beneficiary continues to be employed, but this was the mandatory requirement to comply with the law. This should not have been put into the category of personal consumption. Now, this Supreme Court judgment also gave rise to another question: what would be the fate of this canteen services under GST? Now, in GST, there is a different entry for outdoor catering and canteen vis-a-vis entry for personal consumption. Uh, in GST, if outdoor catering services or canteen is provided mandatory under law, then credit is admissible. This being the more specific entry than the personal consumption entry, in our view, this judgment will not impact the position under GST. Credit on canteen services will be admissible as long as this is mandatory required under the Factories Act. That's our view on this canteen services. We'll move to the other subject, which is the MEIS benefit. So what happened, this MEIS benefit for exports which were made in September to December 2020, it was restricted to rupees 2 crore per IC holder with a notification which was issued on 1st of September. Now, this matter has been in challenge on the ground of promissory estoppel and legitimate expectation. This, in case of MAN industry, this amendment is already under challenge before the Gujarat High Court, where the matter is yet to be listed for hearing. Now, in Delhi High Court, in case of JCBL India, this again has been subject matter of challenge. The Delhi High Court has admitted this matter, and the final outcome is this matter is yet to be announced. Now, last date to file benefit for exports of 1920 is actually 31st of December 2021. So our advice is that exporters should continue to file the claims before the cutoff date to avoid any dispute on this, irrespective of the outcome of this judgment. Second, in case they also feels that they should be a party to this litigation where their export incentive is more than 2 crore, then they will have to file a separate writ to keep their matter alive. On the point that in case there is a favorable outcome out of this writ, then they should also be entitled for the additional incentive, which is presently restricted by the notification. We'll move to the other judgment. That's the ruling of AAAR on the issue of intermediary services in case of Airbus Group. Seems like this issue is not going to settle sooner or later. So in this case, Airbus India and Airbus France, they had an intra-company contract. As part of this contract, Airbus India was supposed to provide assistance in procurement transformation of supply chain services to Airbus. Now, essentially, the scope of work talked about that Airbus India will do a market research. They will identify prospective supplier who can supply parts to Airbus France. They'll help Airbus France in doing contract negotiations with the supplier. Once a contract has been entered, then they will kind of monitor the supply chain. They'll provide requisite supports to the supplier. They'll ensure that there is no disruption in the supply chain and there is no unethical activities undertaken by supplier. What they were not doing was the payment collection, contract arrangement, etc. They argued that whatever they are doing is not an intermediary service. That is something which is more in the nature of market research. But on this point, both AAR differed and unfortunately AAAR also differed on this point. They said that the scope of services provided by Airbus India is wide enough to be covered under the definition of intermediary. They are not only restricted to providing support in identification of potential supplier, rather even after the contract has been entered, they are providing services for smooth supply of products from India to overseas company. So on this point, they concluded that it qualifies to be an intermediary services, and obviously the transaction then would become taxable under this contract. In our view, this is the correct ruling for the reason that the scope of work was very wide and there were essentially much more activities even after the conclusion of contract between the ultimate supplier and Airbus France. We'll move to the next issue, transitional credit on cesses. In fact, we have another ruling on cesses. So this dispute will continue. Let us see what is the issue in this judgment. So this is the judgment by Bombay High Court in case of Godrej and Beyonce Manufacturing Limited. In this case, the petitioner transition credit of education says secondary and higher education says KKC via Tran 1. The credit was claimed by the petitioner and the department was of the view that this credit is not admissible. So they issued a show cause notice. Now this show cause notice deals with one technical amendment which happened in retrospectively in section 140 in explanation 1, 2 and 3, which defines what is an eligible duty and taxes, etc. There is an explanation 3 which says that credit of education cess is not admissible. There are explanation 1 and 2 which does not say that credit of cess is not admissible. Now in this case, petitioner actually transferred this credit under the provisions of section 140 subsection 1, and as per the scheme, whatever credit was lying in your excise returns or service tax returns, that could have been transferred. And the way the provisions are being worded, credit of cess was permitted. So they transferred this credit through Tran 1 under the provisions of section 141 subsection 1. Now, interestingly, when department issued the show cause notice, they relied on explanation 1 and explanation 2 to say that credit of cesses is not admissible. The problem here was the exclusion of cesses was coming from explanation 3, and in the show cause notice, they didn't rely on explanation 3. Amendment which happened in 140 only talked about eligible duties, and explanation 3, which talks about eligible duty and taxes, that is not applicable to section 141 factually. Second, that was not invoked by the department. And third point, whatever invocation they did on explanation 1 and 2, unfortunately, those were not notified at the time when show cause notice was issued. There was a later circular by the department which also clarified that this, in terms of department's interpretation of law, there is no need to notify those explanation 1 and 2 because department feels that explanation 3 is sufficient enough to debar credit on cesses to the manufacturer. Now, what the Bombay High Court held, Bombay High Court said that look, you have applied explanation 1 and 2 in the show cause notice, which is not operational. Since the provision under which you are proposing a disallowance is not operational, so they dropped the show cause notice on this ground first. So indirectly, they kind of allowed the transitional credit. They said that you have not applied explanation 3. In case you want to apply explanation 3 or you want to challenge the credit even after non-applicability of explanation 1 and 2, you have to issue a different show cause notice. So in essence, this Bombay High Court didn't agree with the theory laid down by circular that explanation 3 is sufficient to debar somebody from the credit of cesses. So today the department has a liberty to issue a fresh show cause notice to do recovery of cess provided credit is not available. Now this leads to an important question. First, whether factually can this judgment be applied universally? The answer is no. This is a very fact-based judgment. Even though the outcome is credit of cess is admissible, but that is only in the limited case of Godrej because of the technical defect in the show cause notice. We have a larger bench judgment in case of Sutherland, where the High Court have held that credit of cesses is not admissible. So which means in case department wants to do recovery even from this petitioner, they can very well issue a second show cause notice. They can rely on the larger bench judgment in case of Sutherland and they can demand reversal of credit. So that's the theory on this judgment. Now, interestingly, there is another proposition which was not brought to the notice or which was not argued. See, essentially what we are talking about. We are talking about the recovery of transitional credit. There has been the judgments under the GST regime where they have said that transitional credit is not equivalent to input tax credit as defined under the GST Act. All the recovery in GST audits is happening, or even in the Tran on investigation, that is happening by invoking recovery provisions of GST Act. And there is the other round of judgment which says transitional credit is not an input tax credit. So technically speaking, whatever recovery notices are being issued, that is issued on the point that transitional credit is an input tax credit. If somebody will start using those lines of judgments and argument that this is not an input tax credit as per the scheme of GST, and whatever notices you are issuing, they don't have the power to make recovery of these credits. On that argument itself, there are fair chances that these notices could be squashed. Now, this may seem illogical, but this is the way the law is being worded. You'll also see in this judgment that this Bombay High Court have done a very fine interpretation of law, where from an overall scheme, objective, circular credit of cess was not permissible, but somehow Bombay High Court differ with those theories. So that argument was not brought up in the submissions, and if those arguments can be taken now, it is before the court to test this theory and to pronounce a judgment on this. We believe it's a reasonable ground to defend credit of cesses even after the judgment of larger bench in case of Sutherland. We'll move to the next judgment. Again, it relates to cess, but there the matter was relating to refund. This is the CSAT judgment in case of Fatul. In this case, the applicant had valid credit. When I say valid credit, the credit was admissible under the old regime. There was no debate on that. When the GST was introduced, the applicant filed refund of credit, which was under debate. Now, what happened that when this credit was refunded, the tribunal said that the credit which was eligible, it kind of become a vested right. And they relied on the Supreme Court judgment in case of Eicher Motors, saying that the credit was a vested right of the taxpayer. So department cannot deny this credit later when GST was introduced. Then they said that under section 142, subsection 3, there is a provision to allow refund of credit. And this credit is refundable to the taxpayer. So they pronounce in favor of the applicant. Now, in our view, this judgment is incorrect. First, on the point that credit of cess is a vested right or this is admissible. We have discussed that this matter has been discussed in detail in case of larger bank judgment in Sutherland. So credit of cess anyway was not admissible under GST, so the refund was not an option. First thing. Second, 143 is only a procedural provision. This is not a substantial provision granting refund of cesses. It only talks about that in case there are pending refunds under section 11B of Central Excise Act, then you should follow 143, apply for refund, and it only says that instead of that you will get a cash refund of those things. So that's the only thing. Lastly, even this refund was debatable on the time limitation as well. So those things were not discussed in this judgment. Rather, it kind of assumed that because it was a vested right and the GST was not permitting a credit of this, so let me give a refund of these taxes, and they uphold this. In our view, like we said, this is an incorrect judgment. We'll move to the another judgment. This judgment deals with GST registration for works contract. In our view, that's a very interesting judgment because that is one big issue which most of the works contract clients are facing. So in this case, this is the AR in case of Jew India. In this case, the appellant were executing works contract in the state of Karnataka. They had a head office and execution office in the state of Noida, for which they already had a GST registration. Now the issue was, is there a legal requirement to take registration at a site which is Karnataka or not? That was the dispute. The appellate was of the view that this is not required because I am doing everything from Noida. I am doing execution. I am creating a prefabricated structures in Noida. All decision making management, etc., sits in Noida. So I've taken a registration here. Whatever I'm doing on site, that's more an execution work. That should not be ground to make a point that I am supplying services from the site. Rather, we are supplying services from Noida, and a portion of it gets executed at site. On this point, the AR concluded that yes, there is no separate requirement to take registration at the works contract site, which is Karnataka. They agreed with most of the submissions made by the applicant. They said that the legal provisions require registration at a place from where taxable supply is being made. They held that in this present case, taxable supply is being made from Noida. There is only an execution which happens at a site, and that should not be a ground to say that there is a requirement to seek registration at site as well. Appellate actually also raised another question whether they can avail a ISD registration at site. On this, reading the definition of ISD, it requires an office. Since appellate himself admitted that they don't have any office and they have no intention to open office, they would like to continue with Noida as the office. So the AR held that even the ISD registration is not permitted or it's not needed. Now, it's a favorable ruling to the extent that it says that registrations are not required at site, which means we don't have to do multiple registration, multiple audit, multiple compliances at site. But at the same time, on the point that where it is saying ISD registration should not be obtained, it actually will result in some cost to this taxpayer because there are a lot of services which are procured at site. And wherever the place of supply of these services is local, wherever there is a local tax of Karnataka being charged, and effectively, if there is no ISD to shift those credits from Karnataka to the Noida location, the taxpayer will not be able to claim credit of those services. So to that extent, this is kind of unfavorable in the scheme of things. But yes, it kind of answers the larger question which the industry was debating on the point whether registration is required at site or not. And in our view, again, that's the correct ruling to that extent.